Have you ever wondered why you can microwave your dinner, drive your car on a smooth highway, use the internet to watch this very video? The answer is surprisingly brutal. It's because for thousands of years, humans have been obsessed with finding more efficient ways to kill each other. This relentless drive for military superiority didn't just create bigger armies and deadlier weapons. It accidentally built the very foundations of our modern world. From the can of soup in your pantry to the GPS guiding you home, the fingerprints of conflict are everywhere. This isn't just a story about generals and battles. It's the hidden history of how everything you use, touch, and rely on has a secret, often violent, past. We are going to peel back the layers of history, starting from the moment the first organized armies clashed over farmland. We'll charge through the classical era of Roman legions, medieval world of castles and knights, the explosive arrival of gunpowder, and the industrial and world wars of the 20th century. It's a journey that reveals how the desperate need to win on the battlefield had consequences far beyond it. But why should you care about ancient battles and long-dead inventors? Because understanding this connection is the key to understanding why our world is structured the way it is. The story of military technology is not just about the past. It explains the global power dynamics of today, the structure of our economies, and even the existence of the technologies that define our daily lives. Each new weapon and every tactical shift created ripples that spread through society, changing how people lived, worked, and thought. This isn't just a history lesson, it's the user manual for the modern world, explaining how the race for military dominance ended up shaping your reality in ways you never imagined. Staying until the end is crucial because that's when we connect all the dots. We will reveal the ultimate climax of this story, a direct line from the earliest battlefield innovations to the most fundamental aspects of your life in the 21st century. We will show you precisely how the solutions to ancient military problems became the building blocks of modern civilization, from our political structures, economic systems, to the very device you are holding right now. The final reveal will change how you see the world around you, exposing the hidden architecture of war that quietly supports our peaceful, everyday existence. You'll never look at a can of beans, a highway, or your smartphone the same way again. So, why did humans even start fighting in organized groups? For most of human history, we didn't. As hunter-gatherers, if you didn't like your neighbors, you just packed up your pointy sticks and moved a few valleys over. The world was big, and people were few. Conflict was personal, small-scale, and usually over pretty immediate stuff. But then, around 10,000 BCE, everything changed. We discovered farming. This agricultural revolution was the single most important event in human history, and it also happened to be the starting gun for organized warfare. Suddenly, moving away wasn't an option. You had invested months of backbreaking labor into your fields. You had a permanent home. You had a growing village. And, most importantly, a massive pile of food. This surplus of food was both a blessing and a curse. On one hand, it meant you wouldn't starve over the winter. You could support people who didn't farm, priests, artisans, and most importantly, a guy really good at hitting people with a club. But on the other hand, your grain silo was a giant, glowing neon sign for every hungry group of nomads, or rival villagers for miles around. It screamed, "Free food! Some assembly required!" This created a brand new problem that a few angry guys with sticks couldn't solve. To protect a whole village and its harvest, you needed more than just sporadic brawling. You needed a plan. You needed coordination. You needed people whose full-time job was to prepare for a fight. This is the moment the idea of a professional soldier begins to form. The community realized it was more efficient to feed a few designated toughs to protect everyone's food than for every farmer to drop their hoe and grab a spear whenever trouble appeared. The farmer fed the fighter, and the fighter kept the farmer from getting robbed. This simple exchange laid the groundwork for the first armies. It wasn't about glory or conquest just yet. It was about basic security and risk management. The age of armies was dawning, all thanks to a pile of wheat. Okay, so you've got your village, your grain, and your designated tough guys. But what happens when the raiders show up with something better than pointy sticks? This is where the first great military arms race kicks off, and it's all about metal. The invention of bronze around 3300 BCE wasn't just a shiny new material for making fancy jewelry and durable plows. It was a revolution in lethality. A bronze spearhead could punch through a leather shield. A bronze sword could slice and chop in ways a stone axe never could. Suddenly, the side with the metal had a terrifying advantage. Getting your hands on bronze wasn't easy. It required tin and copper, which were rarely found in the same place. This meant you needed long-distance trade routes, complex mining operations, and skilled metallurgists. All of this was incredibly expensive and difficult to organize. This is where the first seeds of state-level organization and industry begin to sprout, all driven by military necessity. With better weapons came the need for better ways to use them. This led to another game-changing innovation: the chariot. A light horse-drawn chariot carrying an archer or a spearman was the Bronze Age equivalent of a tank. It could smash through infantry lines, harass the enemy from a distance, and chase down anyone who tried to run. But chariots were complex machines. They required skilled woodworkers, wheelwrights, and horse trainers. You couldn't just hand a farmer a chariot. Charioteers became an elite warrior aristocracy. They were expensive to train and equip, so they were high-status individuals, often the nobles and princes of their society. War was no longer a chaotic brawl. It was becoming a science of logistics, technology, and social control. With deadlier weapons and faster armies roaming the landscape, a good fence wasn't going to cut it anymore. You need something much bigger to hide behind. Building these walls was a monumental undertaking. It required organizing vast labor forces and years of construction. It was one of the biggest public works projects of the ancient world, and its only purpose was defense. These walls created a clear line between the inside and the outside, but they also required a powerful central authority. You couldn't build a city wall by committee. You needed a king. To manage his growing armies, he needed a bureaucracy. This is where we see the birth of writing, not for poetry or philosophy, but for accounting and logistics. The earliest cuneiform tablets are essentially spreadsheets, much of it dedicated to the business of war. This cycle of innovation and organization created a powerful feedback loop. Better weapons required bigger armies. Bigger armies required better logistics and more powerful rulers. This process is what transformed collections of villages into the first powerful city-states. The state itself, with its taxes, its laws, its bureaucracy, its king, was forged in the crucible of military necessity. And that raises a new question. What happens when these new, powerful armies meet tactics that are even more organized? So, the Bronze Age collapsed, and the Age of Iron began. The Greeks, particularly the Spartans, perfected this concept with the Phalanx. The man next to you protected your right side with his shield, and you protected the man on your left. It was the ultimate team sport, but with much deadlier consequences. The Phalanx wasn't just a mob of guys with spears, it was a highly disciplined, psychological weapon. This wasn't about individual heroism, it was about the power of the group. This intense need for discipline and collective action had a huge impact on Greek society. Since the state now depended on its citizen soldiers for survival, those citizens demanded a say in how the state was run. This is a direct line to the birth of democracy. But the Phalanx had a critical weakness. It was a tank, but a tank that could only go forward. It was slow, clumsy, and incredibly vulnerable on its flanks and rear. The Romans looked at the Greek Phalanx and said, "That's cute, but we can do better." They created the legion. Instead of one solid block of men, the legion was broken into smaller, more flexible units. It was like trading a solid brick for a set of Legos. You could build it into any shape you needed for the job. To move their armies quickly and keep them supplied, they built an astonishing network of roads. This infrastructure wasn't built for civilian tourists. It was a military machine designed to project power. Furthermore, Roman soldiers were not just fighters, they were engineers. Every single night on the march, the legion would construct a fortified camp. This meant the army was never vulnerable to a surprise attack. This discipline and engineering skill also made them the world's greatest siege experts. War was becoming a science of engineering as much as a contest of bravery. This combination of tactical flexibility, logistical supremacy, and engineering prowess is what allowed Rome to dominate for centuries. Roman law, administration, and even their language spread across Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East on the backs of their legions. After Rome fell, Europe entered a period of fragmentation. In this chaotic environment, a new military innovation galloped onto the scene: the stirrup. It essentially fused the rider to the horse, creating a stable platform. Putting the entire kinetic energy of a charging warhorse behind a single steel point. This transformed cavalry into the decisive shock weapon of the battlefield. This new style of warfare was incredibly expensive. This technological and economic reality created the entire social and political system we call feudalism. But what do you do when your enemy is also a walking fortress? You build a bigger fortress. This is the era of the castle. This created an arms race between offensive and defensive technology. As castle walls got thicker and higher, siegecraft had to evolve. The entire medieval economy was warped around this system. Wealth was measured in land, which was needed to support the knights and castles that protected it, all stemming from the simple innovation of the stirrup. For centuries, the armored knight seemed invincible, but technology eventually found a way to topple the man in the iron suit. From the simple combination of a long piece of yew wood and a trained peasant, an expert longbowman could shoot 10 to 12 arrows a minute. At battles like Crécy and Agincourt, armies of English longbowmen annihilated vastly larger forces of French knights, unleashing a storm of arrows that was described as darkening the sky. The knights, bogged down in mud and pin-cushioned with arrows, were slaughtered. This was a social revolution as much as a military one. Another peasant's weapon that challenged the knight's dominance was the pike. The Swiss perfected the use of pike formations, creating a mobile hedgehog of 18-foot spears that cavalry could not break. A knight's charge would simply shatter against a well-drilled pike block. The horse would be impaled, and the knight, unhorsed and clumsy, would be easily killed by infantry. Power began to shift away from the land-owning nobles and back towards centralized monarchs who could afford to pay for these new types of professional commoner armies. But what happens when a new technology arrives that makes armor almost completely useless and castle walls obsolete? The longbow and the pike had cracked the knight's dominance, but a new invention from China would shatter it completely: gunpowder. The first to make an impact was the arquebus. Heavy, clumsy, wildly inaccurate. It was slow to load and took little skill to aim. It didn't need skill. A lifetime of training to become a knight could be ended in an instant by a peasant who'd been training for a week. This was the ultimate equalizer. It didn't matter how strong you were, how skilled you were. If you got hit, you were dead. This led to pike and shot formations. Pikes formed a solid wall of spears, protecting vulnerable gunners from cavalry while they painfully reloaded. Musketeers would unleash devastating volleys, shredding infantry and cavalry from afar. Gunpowder erased that. Death became random, anonymous. It ripped the romance from combat, replacing it with the cold, hard math of firepower. While firearms were ending the age of the knight, another gunpowder weapon was ending the age of the castle. These bombards fired iron cannonballs that could systematically smash stone castle walls. Feudal lords in their castles had been able to defy kings for centuries, but only a king, a monarch with a national tax base, could afford a modern artillery train. To fund new armies and artillery, kings needed much more money. That drove the creation of nationwide taxation systems and modern finance. You needed cold, hard cash. That led to growing state bureaucracies. The modern nation-state, centralized government, monopoly on violence, ability to tax citizens, was forged in the cannon foundry. Monarchs created the first standing armies, permanent, professional, uniformed, disciplined, and loyal only to the state. As gunpowder upended old power, another revolution gathered steam. In the late 18th century, factories, machines, and interchangeable parts began reshaping how nations armed, supplied, and moved their forces. The Industrial Revolution. Muskets, once painstakingly crafted by individual gunsmiths, could now be churned out by the thousands on assembly lines with interchangeable parts. The invention of the railway and the steamship meant that you could move and supply armies of unprecedented size. The American Civil War is often called the First Industrial War, a conflict where railroad logistics and telegraph communications played a decisive role. A nation's military strength was no longer just the size of its army, but the output of its steel mills, the efficiency of its railways, and the ingenuity of its engineers. This led to the creation of the military-industrial complex in its early form. This intense competition between industrializing nations fueled a global arms race and the expansion of colonial empires. But how did this frantic competition change the world when it finally exploded on a global scale? The industrial arms race soon boiled over into World War I, a cataclysm that introduced a horrifying idea: total war. Entire societies were mobilized, and technology turned the battlefield into a relentless grinder. The battlefield itself was transformed into a meat grinder. The machine gun, barbed wire, and modern artillery created a brutal stalemate on the Western Front. This deadlock demanded a new innovation. The answer came rumbling out of the mud and smoke. The tank, designed to cross no man's land, crush barbed wire, and roll over enemy trenches. The tank and the airplane unlocked the stalemate. World War II unleashed them fully. German blitzkrieg combined fast-moving tank divisions with overwhelming air support from dive bombers. The Battle of Britain was won not just by pilots but by radar. It was a war won by electrons as much as by bullets. Total war required complete mobilization of society. The most secretive project was the Manhattan Project, a weapon that ended the war and defined the geopolitics of the next age. After 1945 came a tense, decades-long standoff between two superpowers. The terror of nuclear annihilation made direct war unthinkable, pushing competition into laboratories, space, and distant proxy conflicts. The space race is the most famous example. Sputnik's launch in 1957 shocked the United States. The goal was military and ideological: put a man on the moon. The US military needed command and control that could survive a nuclear attack. RPA developed a solution: ARPANET. This obscure project became the fundamental architecture of the Internet. Jet engines were perfected for bombers. GPS was created so nuclear submarines could know their exact position. Semiconductors and microchips were developed thanks to massive military funding. The digital age wasn't born in a Silicon Valley garage. It was incubated in Cold War labs. How does this long, violent history shape the world you're living in right this second? So what does this mean for your world today? Survival was never optional. In every era, the motive stayed the same: gain an edge or be destroyed. That pressure shaped everything around you. They needed to move troops, so they built roads. They needed to train officers, so they created engineering schools. They needed mass production, so they pioneered industrial mass production. Canned food, traces to Napoleon's prize for food preservation. The modern ambulance concept came from Napoleonic battlefield medicine. Hospital triage and trauma care were refined through centuries of battlefield medicine. Your smartphone is a convergence of technologies: GPS, semiconductors, the internet, with roots in Cold War military projects. Our civilian world is a pyramid built on a foundation of conflict. Solutions to military problems became everyday conveniences. The drive to create more effective ways to kill inadvertently gave us better ways to live, connect, and thrive. Next time you microwave a meal, search the internet, or follow GPS directions, remember, many of these technologies started as weapons. Almost everything modern began with a much, much louder bang.